Hey everyone coming in. We'll give it just a couple seconds, and I'll start my intro. See a lot of people coming in. Go ahead and drop in the session chat where you're from and what you're excited about with Garen today as you come into the room. All right, thank you everyone for joining us at DemoFest and for this session. MQLs are no longer enough. Why marketing should be required to deliver qualified buying groups with Garen Hess. My name is Garrett Erickson. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Consensus, and I will be moderating today's session. DemoFest is presented by Consensus. Consensus is leading the world into the new era of demo automation. Our platform gets your buyers the content they want when they need it. It then multiplies your revenue team's impact with unique insights on those buyers. As a result, you see faster close times, larger deals, and higher close rates. You can learn more at goconsensus.com or view the automated micro demo in the link in the Docs tab to the right of your screen or the Get a Demo button. We encourage you to participate in today's session. That's how you get the best experience out of DemoFest today. And on the right side of your console, you can see a few ways to engage with Garen and with each other. The chat function will allow you to engage with us as well as with the other attendees. If you're in a session with polls, we encourage you to participate in those polls and give the speakers your feedback. Garen is also anxious to take your questions. We'll have those at the end of the session, so please make liberal use of the Q&A box. You can upvote questions, you can downvote them, and you can ask your own. So that'll help us prioritize things as we move along and have the right questions answered at the end of the session. If anytime you're having technical difficulties, go ahead and click on the gear at the bottom of your screen. That'll take you to this place here, and you'll be able to see a help document that'll troubleshoot some common issues. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Garen Hess. Garen is a serial technology entrepreneur, the founder of Consensus, and the author of the book, Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder, his groundbreaking research-based book on buyer enablement. He is a family man married to his sweetheart, Kristen, for more than 32 years. He's an outdoor enthusiast, aviator, creative writer, and father of 3, the grandfather of 2, and a self-proclaimed tennis freak. His framework for buyer enablement has been adopted by some of the most successful companies in the world. It's my pleasure to do this with you, Garen. I'll stop my share and let you take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Garrett. It is exciting to be with everybody today. And before we get going here, I just want to make sure, Garrett, can you see that screen okay? I'll assume you can because I can see it through Goldcast. Well, it's super exciting to be here. If I'm not mistaken, this is our 5th Demo Fest, which is pretty awesome. It's just really wonderful to be participating in this. As many of you probably know by now, I have taken kind of a consulting and board seat role in Consensus as Doug Johnson has taken over the helm as CEO here at Consensus, which has been a great opportunity for the team and for all of us at Consensus to grow, and for me to actually have a little bit more time to pursue a lot of other things. So I get to do a lot of things that I love to do, including continuing to do thought leadership at Consensus, which is one of the things I love the most. So today our topic is MQLs are no longer enough. And because I've been so focused on pre-sales and sales over the last many years, one of our team members said, I can't believe you're going to talk to marketing, because so often I have said as a company, we're so focused on helping the pre-sales industry and profession progress. They're just saying, why are you going to talk about marketing? Well, it's interesting because when it comes to buyer enablement, the buyers don't really care how we think of their stages that they're in. They're just in the process of trying to make a good decision, pick the right vendor, get everything implemented, and get the solutions that they need. So when you think of buyer enablement, it really starts much sooner than sales and pre-sales, when they typically get involved. So the whole topic today is about why marketing should be required to deliver more than an MQL, or more even than a qualified opportunity. And it's rooted in some experiences that I had that actually led me on the journey to begin the research in buyer enablement. We'll get to that in a minute. Before we get too far into the specific topic, I want to lay some groundwork here to just make sure we're all on the same page, because the phrase buyer enablement has been used in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people at this point. And I want to make sure you understand when I'm talking about buyer enablement, what I'm actually talking about. It's not just about being customer-centric or client-focused, or even how to help buyers move more effectively through the buying process. Those are all related, but there's a more specific picture that you need to have in mind, especially when it comes to understanding this particular topic of qualified buying groups. So as Garrett mentioned, I'm the author of Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder, and the subtitle of this book is How Buyer Enablement Drives Digital Sales and Shortens the Sales Cycle. And the reason that second part of it, shortening the sales cycle, is so important is because to fundamentally shorten the sales cycle, we have to get very specific about what makes the sales cycle long and how we address that. And there are a lot of different ways you can tackle that question. A lot of sales enablement tackles it from the sales perspective. How do we shorten the sales cycle from the sales side? The question becomes, when you're focusing on buyer enablement, what causes that to be so long on the buying side, and how can we shorten it? Now, if we look at just some historical data points, again, these are things I've brought up in previous conferences and things, but just to review them fairly quickly here, this was research done about 10 years ago by CEB, which was eventually acquired by Gartner. And this data is quite compelling. And the first time I saw this data, it made a lot of sense to me. And it basically over here is the likelihood of purchase is on the left side axis. And the horizontal axis is the number of people in the buying group. And you can see that in the first, if you have one person, let's say you have a solution or a product that's going to be effective at solving a specific problem. If you're going to sell that to one person, they get to make the buying decision. You have a very high likelihood of making a sale. The likelihood to purchase is 81%, but you add one other person and it drops by 25 percentage points or so. And so you've got the likelihood to purchase decreasing as the buying group size gets larger. And you can see back in 2013 or 2014 that the buying group size was about 5.4. And you get up to 6+, and the likelihood to purchase drops from 81% down to 31%. So this data, this content, or this research really intrigued me when I first saw it, and it matched a lot of the things I had experienced in sales over the years. Well, there was updated research a couple of years later by CEB also, and they basically said, well, now the buying group size is 6.8. So if it dropped 50 percentage points from 1 to 6 people, and we get to 6.8 people on the average, it's even more likely to get lower. They didn't have updated stats on the likelihood to purchase, but all of us know inherently the more people that get involved in a decision, the more difficult it is to make that decision. A lot of buyer enablement commentary that I hear these days is about how to help your prospect move more quickly along the buying process. And that's great. I talk about that as well. It's really, really important to think about helping your prospect move more effectively, more easily through the buying process. What I still don't hear enough about is the focus on the buying group. It's not about the one person. And that's really where my focus and my research has always been, which is how do we help that buying group move effectively through the process? And just by way of update on the research, you can see that the buying group has grown from 5.4 about 10 years ago to over 10 a couple of years ago, and even more recent research suggests it can be as high as 20. I spoke with people who sell into higher ed, and their buying groups are 40+ on average, which just sounds like, shoot me now, having to try to do that. But the reason I bring this up is the reality is that if we just take the same approach that we have in the past, the fact that more and more people are getting involved in the buying group just means the sales cycle, or we'll just say the buying cycle, which is just the same phrase for the same thing in two different ways. The buying cycle takes much longer. So we can't just stay stagnant in the way that we approach buyer enablement, because the buying group gets bigger and bigger. And that's why I want to introduce this concept of really encouraging marketing to get involved in buyer enablement and partnering with sales and pre-sales in a way that there's a specific requirement and a measured requirement for marketers to deliver more than just a lead or a prospect, but an actual buying group, or at least to be doing the actions or functions, taking the actions that will lead to delivering a buying group. So one of the interesting stats that came out of last year's report on the sales engineering workload, compensation and workload report, is the disparity between the way that sales engineers and sales think about how many people are involved in the buying group. You can see the median for the sales engineers number of, the question was how many people are in the stakeholder group to make a buying decision, and the average is 4.8, but the sales counterparts reported 11. So this is much more in line with what the research suggests about B2B buying, and it's probably the more accurate perception. And there could be a lot of reasons that pre-sales doesn't necessarily think about all the different people that get involved. There are other stakeholders that sales ends up dealing with, and maybe pre-sales doesn't. In pre-sales we don't necessarily get as much exposure to. So again, the reality is that you're dealing with quite often 10 plus stakeholders that have to make this purchasing decision, and the more people that get involved, the less likely it is for that purchase decision to get made. And my book, Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder, is focused largely on how do we help sales, how do we in sales and pre-sales help the buying group how do we discover and engage that buying group and help them move faster along the process as a group, along the buying process. Again, this topic today is more focused on the marketing side, but the reason I hope that all of you in sales and pre-sales will want to hear this is because I hope that you'll be convinced after this that you should go encourage those of your counterparts in marketing to adopt this mentality and this measurement of success. And I'll explain more about why we would want to do that. But also, if you're a marketing leader or practitioner in this audience, I hope this will convince you to want to adopt it, because the end result is we're going to have a more cohesive revenue, I'll say a cohesive focus on buyer enablement across the revenue team, as well as shortening that whole sales process or the sales cycle. So this is one of the images I've used over the years to explain the challenge of buying groups. And this is the same sculpture from two different angles. And this is called anamorphic art. And this is art produced by a anamorphic sculptor in France. And I find this really fascinating that you can look at the exact same thing from two different angles and see something completely different. And I find it an apt metaphor for how all the different stakeholders in the buying group look at acquiring a new solution of some kind. You might think you're selling the giraffe, and some of your buyers in the buying group think they want a giraffe and they think you have a great giraffe. The others in the buying group may see it as an elephant and they don't really want an elephant. And even though it's the exact same product, the exact same solution, every buyer has their different role in the organization. They have their own reasons, both from functionality, from problems they see or don't see, or political reasons they run into, to just personal reasons they may not want to support the acquisition of a new technology. So the big challenge in buyer enablement is not just how do we get the prospect to move more easily from stage to stage in the buying process. That is an important part of buyer enablement, but the fundamental challenge in buyer enablement is group buying dysfunction, which is getting alignment across all the stakeholders in the group as quickly and as early as possible in the buying process. So that's the part of buyer enablement that we're going to focus on today, and specifically from the very early stage of the formation of this buying group in a way that is usually associated with marketing. So in short, to recap sort of the summary of facilitating the buying group or buyer enablement, is facilitating the buyer group is the only thing that matters, I would say, in all of B2B sales. If you will focus specifically on just how to facilitate that buying group, your sales rate will increase, sales cycle is going to decrease. My personal close rate went from 38% to 72% when I finally implemented all the aspects of what's in my book. And that was shocking even to me, because I was expecting some lift in the close rate and shortening of the sales cycle, but I wasn't expecting almost a doubling of my personal close rate. So again, when I think about buyer enablement, it's about facilitating the buying group. And in a lot of ways, again, I would just want to emphasize, it's really the only thing that matters. Everything else is subordinate to this particular task or skill to be able to effectively sell into B2B. So with all of that foundation said, let's jump into this particular topic of qualified buying groups. But let's set this foundation of what is an MQL. I mean, this is all old hat to most of us, but just to see what some of these definitions are. Here is one from HubSpot. A marketing qualified lead is a lead that the marketing team is deemed more likely to become a customer compared to others, right? They're qualified. This determination is based on criteria such as web pages were visited, content offers downloaded, CTAs clicked, social posts interacted with. Forrester defines it very simply, which is just a marketing qualified lead is a lead deemed worthy to be handed off to sales. Obviously, that varies the qualification organization by organization. What's interesting to me is that we've already established, and we all know that the buying group is at least 10 people. And what is marketing's requirement? To deliver one qualified person. And I'm not saying that's not a good place to start. Granted, we all are being, to one degree or another, successful at using this model of marketing qualified leads that turn into qualified opportunities as they get handed off to sales and more qualified and so on. I'm just suggesting that there is a better way that I want you to consider, because with the advent of the technologies that are available today, including at Consensus and other kinds of technologies, marketing should no longer be considered successful by delivering only one out of the possibly 20 people that need to be pulled together in the buying group, especially because those buyers are engaging earlier and earlier in the process before they talk to sales. So nothing against the marketing, any marketing folks that are in the audience, but the amount of work marketing is doing at engaging the required stakeholders is, if there's 11 people, about 9% of the work, leaving sales and pre-sales to do the other 91%. If it is true that discovering, engaging, and facilitating and coaching that buying group is the thing that actually makes B2B sales most effective, then what we're saying is we're leaving the lion's share of the work to be done by sales and pre-sales, And this is just delivering one lead, one marketing qualified lead is an old school way of thinking about it. And I'm not saying it again, it's not to some degree a successful model. Obviously, almost all organizations in the world still use this model of delivering an MQL and a sales qualified lead and so on. I'm just suggesting that now that the buying group has changed dramatically in size, now that technology is here that allows marketers to discover and engage stakeholders in the buying group sooner and more easily and more effectively, that we ought to change the rules of the game for marketing. Because if we do, we will have buying groups being delivered into sales rather than one prospect, one qualified prospect. And just imagine what would happen if that were the case. So this is a very simplistic way of thinking about buyer enablement compared to traditional selling, but it's a way of just explaining how focusing on discovering and engaging stakeholders earlier shortens the sales cycle. So you can see up at the top is the traditional selling approach. Month after month, different stakeholders get involved in the buying process, and it stretches on and on and on. A true buyer enablement approach basically says this: we know that stakeholders 1, 2, 3, and 4 are typically involved in the sales of this type. So here's some info addressing the most common questions those stakeholders have. And we try to engage those stakeholders earlier in the process. So again, this is very simplistic, but it helps illustrate the idea that what we're trying to do is pull those stakeholders sooner into the process than they would naturally happen. So the question is, how do we encourage them to get involved earlier, and then it would just naturally happen. So if you're willing to adopt a buyer enablement approach, you'll see this buying cycle time shorten. And this is just one example, and we've got literally dozens from our customers at Consensus. And I'm not necessarily trying to promote Consensus, by the way. Of course, I love Consensus, and there's a lot of benefits that can come from using demo automation, enterprise demo automation platform like Consensus. But really, buyer enablement can be implemented in a many number of ways. It's just that using a technology like Consensus can help accelerate the process. But even if you were to do the buyer enablement principles manually, you're going to be able to see some shortening of the sales cycle. But just imagine if your sales cycle, or the buying cycle, as we say here, is reduced by about 30%. I mean, that would, across your entire organization, how remarkable would that be? So I just want to emphasize that these are not just conceptual ideas. These were conceptual when I first pulled this all together into my book and pulled that research together, which took about 2 or 3 years, by the way, to really pull all that together. And it was conceptual at that point, but it has been proven in organization after organization now how it actually has an impact on the business measurable business results. So I want to make this case that marketing should be required to deliver more, the qualified buying group. And I want to start by telling you a story. And this was a story, it was actually my own experience. And this story, or I'll say this experience, just blew my mind. And the experience really started and is coupled with the founding of Consensus. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of background there. In 2014, we got out of beta with our first demo automation version of our platform. And we had a few customers that had paid to be part of the beta process and things, and we were just trying to figure things out. We didn't know how much to charge for it. There were only, well, I want to say 3 or 4 people in the company at the time. And I was, as the founder and CEO at the time, I was both the sales, the closer, you might say, and I was also the BDR or SDR. I was setting up appointments for myself. And what I was really trying to do is establish a pattern and trying to understand what is the repeatable model that we could use at Consensus to go out and get new customers. And so we came out in early January of 2014 with the first version of Consensus. And we started using it for our own, well, I started using it for our own BDR outreach. So what I did was I got a bunch of possible customers, prospects that were in mostly the local area here in Utah, because I wanted to actually go visit them in person if possible. And I just started cold calling. We called about 100 of these and reaching out to them on LinkedIn and email and calling and so on. And I remember very distinctly that week, on a Monday, I got a confirmation from somebody that said, yeah, this sounds interesting. We struggled to know how to deal with all the demos we have, and we'd love to talk to you about it. And so I said, well, can we set up an appointment for Wednesday? And they said, that sounds great, which was just 2 days away. And I wasn't sure how to use Consensus at this point, or demo automation, but I just was experimenting, and I said, hey, if you're interested, before we meet on Wednesday, I have this link I can send you that would take you through an automated video demo of of our platform. At the time, that's all we had was videos. We didn't have the interactive tours and things. And so they said, okay, that sounds interesting, send it over. And I said, okay. So I sent it over. And a couple hours later, I got a notification that said, oh, so-and-so that you sent the demo to watched your demo. And I was able to look at some of the analytics, and I thought, wow, that's cool. I can see that they're watching it. And 10 years ago, that was kind of an amazing thing, just seeing that one person. But then a few minutes later, I saw so-and-so shared the demo with somebody else, and they're watching it. And over the course of 24 hours, 12 different people, the demo got shared around, and 12 different people engaged with the demo. So by about Tuesday afternoon, all these people had been engaging, and I was getting all of these notifications, and I was just super excited. I'm just, wow, this demo is not only getting viewed, but it's getting shared. And then what happened next is what really blew my mind. First of all of that was really surprising to me, because we were hoping it would get shared, but we didn't know how much people would share it. So the fact that it got shared to 12 different people was, wow, it was so exciting. And I knew we were onto something, but what happened next really, really is what got to me. And that is when I got to the appointment on Wednesday morning, all 12 people showed up to that first appointment. And I was just going, okay, wow, that is incredible. What do I do now? I didn't know what to do in the sales conversation, because I had all these stakeholders there, and I did have some information about what was driving their interest and things from the automated demo, but I wasn't sure what to do. Should I try to show them something? They already seen the demo. They saw a lot of the value prop in the demo and things. So I just said, it's great to have you all here. I see that you all watched the demo to one degree or another, and I see your interests, and do you have questions? And there's this long pause, and the CEO of the company, which was on the call, he said, I want to talk pricing. I was thinking, wow, okay, we have 12 decision makers here, 12 influencers in the buying group. They're all here in the first call, and the CEO wants to talk pricing. Well, we were still experimenting with pricing. I think we had 6 customers at the time, and we didn't know what to charge for it. And I kind of intuited, and we were charging way too little at the time, because I didn't really have any idea. We were really, the time we were focusing on small businesses and things, and it was just a different thing. But I intuited that all of this activity, this engagement, and the fact they all showed up on the call, that maybe we ought to charge more, because again, we were just experimenting. And so I tripled the price just to see what would happen. I said, here's how much it is. And he goes, well, send me a quote. And of course, I answered a few other questions. We did spend the time on the call answering other questions that they had. But what blew my mind was all 12 stakeholders were engaged before that first call, and they showed up on the call. And we had moved from not knowing those buyers not knowing anything about Consensus to being interested in pricing in just 3 days. Now, is this what's going to happen every time if you adopt what I'm suggesting? No. Right? This is not going to happen every time. It's still rare to have 12 people engage around an automated demo. I wouldn't say it's super rare, but it's not the most common thing. We quite often get 2, 3, 4 initially or early in the buying cycle, but to get 12, that was a lot. But it did get my gears spinning. And I just thought that, in fact, the thought that occurred to me when they all showed up the first time was, I'm not sure this has ever happened in the history of sales, where on the first call, you have all the stakeholders required to make a buying decision. I could be wrong about that, but in my experience, it had never happened. And I realized, wow, we must really be onto something for this to happen even in this situation. And I remember thinking, what are we doing here? Is what we've created at Consensus, is it a demo automation platform, or is it I didn't have the words for it, but is it about the people that get involved to buy something, to make a buying decision? And this really got me started, got me thinking about this whole question about, wow, the hardest thing in sales is not defining your value prop. It's not finding even that one prospect. All these things are hard. It's not how well you communicate. It's not all the closing techniques. It's not all those things, even though those are difficult. The hardest thing is discovering and engaging all of those different buyers, the stakeholders that have to make that purchase decision, and making sure that they can get aligned. And the fact that this happened in just 3 days really made me think there is something fundamentally different about using a technology like this that can make a significant change in the B2B sales world. So that led to my intense interest in facilitating the buying process and all the research that came later. So let's define what is a qualified buying group. And this may morph over time from my perspective, but this is kind of how I think about it now. And I'm just putting it out there to begin the conversation about this particular topic. A qualified buying group is 2 or more stakeholders within the same organization that are aware of each other and ready to engage with sales together in a qualified buying decision. So if you think of that scenario that I just shared with you and that experience, there were 12 of them. But I would say if you got 2 or more, you would have the beginnings of the group. My argument, or the thing I'm trying to persuade about here, is not that we should require marketing to deliver the entire buying group, but that they should be delivering more of the buying group than they currently are. Certainly, many stakeholders in that, let's say 11 stakeholder buying group will have to be engaged during the sales process. But my perception is that marketing in general is not even asking the question usually, how can we get more stakeholders involved and engaged before we hand it off to sales? I don't think that really occurs to many marketing leaders and practitioners. It's all about getting that one prospect qualified, because that's the thing in and of itself. But with the buying group size increasing, it is not enough to let sales and pre-sales do the rest of the work. Marketing should be required to at least be trying to engage other stakeholders earlier and sooner. So again, what is a qualified buying group? A QBG, it is 2 or more stakeholders in the same org that are aware of each other and that they're ready to engage with sales in a qualified buying decision. So how do we measure qualified buying groups? My contention is that this could be measured by tracking how many stakeholders are handed off to sales and how many actually show up to the first conversation. We are all delighted when anyone shows up for the first conversation, and I won't blame anyone for that. I am delighted because in sales we get so many no-shows, but I want to establish the bar higher. And marketing should be required to deliver more than one prospect, because if there are going to be 11 at least, requiring them to deliver at least 2 is not a bad thing. And now, maybe not every deal that comes across is going to have 2 or more, but again, what percentage of those leads or prospects that get handed off can we have marketing deliver a group rather than a single person? I would argue that as sales and pre-sales expect this from marketing, and as marketing is measured by this requirement, that this fundamental decision to take the actions necessary to discover and engage more of the buying group before you hand it off to sales will have a tremendous impact on how quickly and how effectively this buying group goes through the process after it gets handed off to sales. So this is some old data, but I just wanted to put it up here that we all know that buyers get involved much earlier than they used to. This is an older slide, but that we've used for a lot of years. But my point is that if we've known for so long that buyers don't engage with sales until they are 57% of their way through the buying process, or maybe even more now, right? Because they're doing all kinds of research on their own. Do you think they're doing it solely on their own? Sometimes they might, but quite often buyers get involved, other stakeholders in the buying group get involved, but we don't even know about them because we're not even trying to engage them before we hand it off to sales. Yes, there are other buyers that get involved after it gets handed off, but again, if we know that so much activity happens before buyers are even ready to meet with sales, and some of that activity involves talking with other stakeholders, why are we not requiring marketing to identify who they are and send them over as a group, right? So this also goes back to some very interesting data that was put out a few years ago, which you may have seen already, but to emphasize in this context, out of all the time that buyers spend in buying activities for a specific transaction or specific purchase, they only spend 17% of their time with suppliers. Well, what are they doing with all the rest of their time? 22% of that time is meeting with the buying group. So they're actually spending more time engaging with the rest of the buying group than with suppliers. And if you're one of these suppliers, you might only get 5% of this total pie, because they might be talking to, let's say, 3 suppliers. So the question here is, what are they doing out here, and how can you get involved, and how can you make all of this happen sooner than when it gets handed off to sales? And I'll just mention here that one of my translations to this data is that they are fumbling the ball when you're not around, because they don't know how to talk to this buying group. They don't understand who the stakeholders really should be, or how they should, what their concerns and challenges that they're going to face with every different stakeholder in the buying group, not like you do. And so also fundamental to buyer enablement is really helping the buyers go out and engage those other stakeholders effectively, because you know which stakeholders need to get engaged and how to engage them effectively. But the main point here is, if they're engaging with this buying group, how do we get involved when they're not when they're not talking to us? How do we get involved in that conversation? And this leads to a concept that we developed a few years ago that we've sometimes called selling in the gaps or between meetings. So if you think about the gap between meetings after meeting, this question is, what are you doing as a buying coach, as a salesperson? What are you doing as this buying coach to help the buyers move more effectively through their buying process before the next meeting? So often in sales, we try to get everything ready to have a great next meeting. When there's so much activity going on behind the scenes, we really need to be involved during that. Now, how does this involve marketers? Well, I'm just going to use one example and then leave the question open for you to just think about how marketers can do this in other ways. But the example that I'm going to use is the one that happened to me and that we've been using at Consensus from the time from the time this experience happened. And that is from the time I set the appointment as an SDR to the time I had the appointment as an AE, even though I was the same person in that scenario, there's a gap. In this, my scenario was only 2 days. Quite often it's a week or something, right? And so it's this particular gap I want to focus on. And in many companies, this is part of marketing's purview, is marketing's responsibilities is the sales development or the development of the prospect. Now, it may be that this is in this SDR function in your organization is in sales. So take it for what it's worth, but you can use this as an example as something marketing could be. If marketing's not taking this particular function on, they're doing lots of other things with webinars and downloadable case studies and all kinds of other things that are happening as they engage and emails as they're engaging the buyer earlier before it gets handed off even to the SDRs, right? So, but I want to focus on this particular gap because it's the one we've worked the most with at Consensus, and it's the one I've had the most personal experience with and where I've seen the benefits. And it's this gap again between the time you set the appointment and the time the appointment happens. And what is it that the SDRs are typically doing? They are typically confirming the appointment. If they're good, they will confirm the appointment. But they don't usually do much more than that because they're making a lot of other calls in the meantime. They're trying to get other appointments set up. And that just leaves this gap where the buyer was very interested and they're waiting for the next they're waiting for the sales conversation, but in the meantime, if we don't help them, they're just losing momentum. And this is a key opportunity to not only keep that one prospect engaged, but to begin to start to discover and engage other prospects before they even have that first appointment. So if we zoom out a little bit, again, the question is, what can we do between meetings to help discover and engage the buying group? That's what the selling in the gaps is. But again, to emphasize what we're really talking about here at a higher level, which is just how can marketing help a single prospect not only move along more quickly, but then discover and engage other stakeholders and deliver those over to sales. So how did this work in my scenario? Well, what happened is I said, hey, here's some collateral I want you to engage with. In this case, it was an automated demo. Here's some collateral that you might be interested in engaging with before the appointment. Would you be interested? Yes, I would. Please send it over. This collateral, of course, then ideally will automatically tailor itself or customize itself to each stakeholder in the buying group. Not all collateral does that. But in this case, with Consensus Demo Automation, it does that. And that's why it's effective at getting these other stakeholders involved. In this scenario, because I was brand new, it happened very organically. I shared it with the first prospect. They immediately started sharing it with others. What we've learned since is that if you are an SDR and you encourage them to share it, they will be more likely to share it. So you want to encourage them, hey, please watch this before our meeting. And then when they watch it, you follow up with another comment. Hey, I saw that you watched this. I would like to encourage that you share it with other people in the buying group. Are there others in your organization that might be interested in this? That's a very common question, and you can either do that on a phone call or send it by email. But are there others that you might be interested? You might even also suggest who they could be, because you might know, oh, these roles need to get involved. And I've done some research on LinkedIn, and most SDRs may not do that, but again, there's technology that can help us identify different stakeholders and who might be recommended. But at the very least, we ought to be asking, are there others interested in this that you could share this with? Well, let me tell you, if you haven't heard of this before, the impact of this process at that stage. So a prospect is 34% more likely to become a qualified opportunity if they watch an automated demo. So that's cool. It's just like, and that's really critical for automated demos, but it could be a different stat for a different type of collateral. Maybe they're 10% more likely because they read a case study or whatever it is. But in this case, in this specific scenario, they're 34% more likely if they watch the automated demo. But watch what happens if they share it with one other person. With one other person, if they share the demo with one other person, they're 81% more likely to become a qualified opportunity if they watch an automated demo and share it with at least one other stakeholder. So this is a best practice. Share the demo with the prospect, encourage them to share it with somebody else before that first call. It's a simple thing. As we have focused on this, the times that we've done better, and we do better and worse at this at different times in our own organization, the times we've focused on that has had a tremendous impact on the quality of the prospects and the buying groups that show up in that first conversation. Even if more than one person does not show up in that first conversation, but they've shared it with, let's say, 2 or 3 people, and some of those have engaged, even then in the first conversation, you have a call that goes something like this: hey, I noticed you watched the demo. Isn't that interesting? I see you identified these topics as very interesting, these other topics as somewhat interesting. And I also noticed you shared it with so-and-so. Tell me more about those people. What are their roles? How do you think they get involved in this decision-making process? I see that their interests are sometimes similar to yours and sometimes different. Tell me why you think that's the case. Think how substantive that conversation is compared to the typical first call after a typical setup to a handoff for marketing. So again, this is just one scenario of selling in the gap before a handoff to sales. But I would encourage you, those of you in marketing and those of you who are not, to go to your marketing counterparts and ask the question, how can we do something similar with almost any piece of high quality collateral? How do we use that collateral to help engage the stakeholders in the buying group? So how does this work in Consensus? As an example, they do this by the viewer will invite others. They'll click on invite others and add those that they're inviting, or they might forward the link, right? There may be different systems that you are using that have ways to share the content or collateral that they have. We need to encourage that and try to gather them, those other stakeholders, and pass them along. So ponder this question: what would the likelihood to close be if marketing delivered a qualified buying group instead of just a qualified lead? I don't know the answer to that because this is a new requirement that I'm suggesting. Another way to discover and engage that buying group is through AI. And I certainly can't share any details, but this is something that there's some work going on here inside Consensus. So using technology to recommend, to discover, encourage, and attract and engage those other stakeholders, this is why I think this requirement of a QBG is ripe for its time, because all the technologies are here for marketing to do it. So they shouldn't be allowed, in my opinion, to just have the same requirement they had 15 years ago to deliver a marketing qualified lead. So in closing, I want to make the qualified buying group a requirement for marketing success. This famous quote by Peter Drucker, "What gets measured gets done." If you set this up as a measured activity, even if it's not even compensated, but you're just measuring it coming out of marketing, even if you measure it without marketing's knowledge, but then you feed it back to them and say, hey, we noticed that out of the last 100 leads, you gave us exactly 0 qualified buying groups. Maybe that would be, because it's hard sometimes to get marketing and sales aligned. But I think that this is one of the key benefits of doing this, is that it'll orient your whole revenue organization around the buying group, which in my opinion, and the research shows, that is fundamental and can be a distinct competitive advantage to being effective at moving these buyers through the process more effectively. Buyer enablement and stakeholder engagement will happen earlier, and the deals, of course, move faster. And that concludes my session. This part of the session. We'll go into Q&A now. about qualified buying groups.
Yeah, thank you so much, Garen. As a marketer, I feel both enlightened and exposed. So I think you've
as you should be.
Yeah. So our first question comes from Mark McKinley, and it says, "So I'm making a somewhat controversial statement in his presentation tomorrow about concerning buyer enablement and that it. Sorry, I'll just read it verbatim. So I was trying to paraphrase it. Okay. Mark says, so I'm making a somewhat controversial statement in my presentation tomorrow concerning buyer enablement, and that it is, who cares? The reality is buyer enablement is a shared responsibility, but oftentimes traditional metrics and behaviors remain siloed. Any thoughts on how the shared responsibility can be encouraged, promoted, and adopted?
It's such a great question, and I agree with you. The siloing still happens, and it's not just between marketing and sales, but you've got client success because, right, we all know we're in a cyclical revenue cycle that goes on and on. In fact, I've thought about writing a second book called Selling is Hard, but Renewals Are Harder, to try to emphasize you've got to implement buyer enablement in the client success phase. So there are all these different organizations within our organizations that can easily be siloed. I think one of the best ways is to create measurements that require the collective work together. And that's why the qualified buying groups, for example, is one of those types because of measurements. Because if marketing is measured on that, they're more likely to start talking to sales about, well, we're the types of buyers we need to get involved as different personas and so on. I don't know that I have all the answers to that, but in my experience, if you can figure out what you measure to lead to the behaviors that you want, that seems to be one of the most effective things. And I totally agree with you that buyer enablement is a team sport across the entire revenue org. And it's one of the challenges, most difficult challenges is trying to get everybody on the same page. I mean, I remember, speaking of marketers, that we had one customer over in Europe who the pre-sales team was sort of accidentally producing more leads than the marketing team was because they were using consensus to, and all the sharing was going on and all these new contacts were going in the system. And it actually, the CMO ended up shutting down. They had more political clout and they actually shut down consensus in that org because they were too embarrassed that pre-sales was producing more leads than marketing. So it can get really, that's an extreme case, but it's one of those ones that makes you realize, wow, the silos can get really big sometimes. But I guess my main thought at the moment is at least try to engage in conversation about holistic buyer enablement across the buying experience, and where possible, start putting in measured metrics that can hopefully, if those metrics require sales and marketing or sales and client success to work together to achieve those metrics, that's where I think we'd see some results.
Great. Another couple of people asked about your 70% close rate. Did that come from MQL or from some other stat that you were measuring before?
That close rate was from qualified opportunity to close. Yeah, so not from MQL.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Yep.
Another question here: what factors do you see out there that prevent successful partnership between marketing and the sales or pre-sales organization?
This would be an interesting discussion, just kind of a roundtable discussion, honestly, to hear from everybody. As I mentioned, political things get in the way quite frequently. I think, and it's difficult to figure out how to prevent this, but there's always so much finger pointing going back and forth between, how come you aren't treating our leads well, and how come you're not giving us the right number of leads or the right types of qualified leads. I think there's a section in my book about how to measure the effectiveness of buyer enablement and the metrics that I propose that we use to do that. Qualified buying groups is not in there, by the way, because this is kind of a newer thought that I've had about marketing that I'm advocating for. But really, the question around effectiveness as a revenue org if you orient your whole perspective around the buying group, I think then it naturally has to break down some of the walls, because some of the walls, I think, arise because we're just focusing on one contact. Here's a qualified contact. Let's pass it over to sales. And now we're trying to get that contact to become a qualified opportunity. Naturally, if we focus on the buying group, it becomes, in a sense, more messy, because more messy and more effective. It sounds strange, but the reason it's messy is because you've got more stakeholders that have to get involved. They're going to get involved anyway. They have to get involved anyway. The question is, how do we talk about it as an organization? How do we focus on it? And because there are multiple people that have to get involved, and it's a recursive process, so it's kind of like this. You might have one prospect get handed off to sales, and they start the conversation. Well, is marketing's job done? Let's just say that you're just still focused on an MQL instead of a qualified buying group. Is marketing job done? Well, if they are thinking about the whole buying group, no, they in a sense should be out marketing too and trying to prospect all of those other stakeholders in the buying group. Why are we just passing one along and then sort of hoping and expecting sales to be effective at marketing to all the other stakeholders? There needs to be this partnership between marketing and sales. And again, my contention is that if you can get your organizations talking about the buying group and measuring the buying group, and that starts with understanding what personas need to be involved. And I bet if you ask your marketing counterparts, or if your marketing leaders in this conversation today, I would bet you that most of the time you're not thinking about the different stakeholders. You're thinking about the most common entry point, the ICP, which is a certain persona at a certain type of organization, a certain industry, and so on. And that's not a bad thing. That's a fantastic place to start. But marketers, if you did a random quiz to all the marketers in your org and said, name us 6 of the different personas that get involved in our buying process for this particular product line in this segment, you're going to have a lot of blank stares, because they're not thinking about that. They're thinking about just that one prospect. So this is a long-winded way of just saying, I think focusing on this buying group as a whole should help bring down the walls. It certainly helps in our own organization, although we still have challenges with that even within our own organization in different ways, but it does help. There are a lot of other ways that this, to engage, I think, between the orgs as well. But those are some of my thoughts at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have a couple of other questions that we're not going to be able to get to about measurement and advice on how to measure the qualified buying group and how to prioritize working them based on title or number of stakeholders. But looking forward to some thought leadership coming from you on these types of things, and we can try to answer these questions.
Feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn if wanted to shoot me a direct message. I'm happy to chat about some more of this if you'd like.
Perfect. All right. May I steal the screen share from you, Garen?
Absolutely. Thanks, Garrett. Okay, hand it off to you, Garrett. Hope everybody has a great rest of the conference, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. We really appreciate your time, Garen. We know how busy you are with all of this, and so these insights were so valuable. Again, want to thank all of our DemoFest speakers. We're excited to see everyone again in person later this year. We had a great time at DemoFest X in San Francisco, and we're going to bring it to everyone in New York and London coming up. Please be sure to hit the survey button at the top right corner to rate Garen on the survey, as well as all the other sessions that you've attended today. We also encourage you to stop by our expo hall and visit our premier partners. This is a free event, so our partners have gone above and beyond the call of duty to make this a successful DemoFest each year. And then lastly, thank you again to all of you for making DemoFest what it is, for being here, for being present and and for your questions and your collaboration with us. Here are the sessions that are coming up next. You'll be pushed to the next one in your track, wherever you are. And then if you go to the agenda tab, you can move between them freely. So again, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of DemoFest.
Thanks, everybody. See you now.